All right, listeners, getting ready for the UPSC, especially if you're tackling international relations. This one's for you. We're going way back to ancient Greece with Aristotle.
Yeah, and you might be thinking, what's this old philosopher got to do with modern IR? But Aristotle was really into how societies work, and that's still important today for understanding how nations get along on the world stage.
So we're skipping the famous stuff like logic and all that.
Not this time. We're going deep on something he thought was super important for his political ideas.
Yeah.
The household. We'll unpack what he meant by that. And the big thing, how it connects to things like slavery and property issues that are still around in international relations, even in the 21st century.
Okay, now I'm interested. Break it down for us. What was so special about the household for this guy Aristotle?
So for Aristotle, the household, it wasn't just family, it was like a mini version of the ideal state, a training ground for being a good citizen, and the foundation of a stable polis or city-state. He thought people learned important virtues there, like justice, cooperation, leadership, all within the household.
So like a well-functioning household was a blueprint for a strong and stable state.
Exactly. And UPSC folks, this idea has big implications for understanding international relations. A state's internal stability, its domestic policies, even its cultural norms can all impact its foreign policy, how it interacts with other states. It's that old connection between what's happening inside a country and how it acts on the world stage.
Makes sense. But gotta ask, when we're talking about the household in ancient Greece, there's a kind of one elephant in the room.
You're talking about slavery, right?
Yeah. It's hard to ignore that Aristotle actually defended slavery.
Yeah.
Kind of jarring for modern folks.
It is. And for anyone studying international relations, it reminds us that ideas about human rights and equality haven't always been universal. Aristotle actually believed in a natural hierarchy. He even went so far as to say there were natural slaves, people who he believed were born to be ruled.
Hold on, he really thought some people were just meant to be subservient. How did he justify that?
His argument was that some individuals just lacked the capacity for reason and self-governance. So they were suited for being subservient to those with superior rational faculties. A troubling concept, for sure, especially considering how this idea of natural hierarchy has been used throughout history to justify all sorts of inequality and exploitation both within and between nations.
So while we obviously reject this natural slaves idea, is there anything we can learn from this for understanding international relations today? After all, we still see power imbalances, exploitation, and even justifications for inequality out there on the world stage.
Absolutely. Aristotle's stance on slavery forces us to confront how different societies throughout history have viewed power and hierarchy. Highlights the fact that these power dynamics, even if they're not as explicitly stated as they were in Aristotle's time, still shape how states interact. Think about economic power imbalances, global inequalities, even the legacies of colonialism.
Okay, now that's helpful for framing an essay on the UPSC exam. It's about understanding the historical roots of those power dynamics that still play out globally.
Exactly. And just like Aristotle saw a hierarchy within the household, he also had very specific views on the roles of men and women.
Yeah, and this is where we get some of those, shall we say, less enlightened quotes from Aristotle. His view on women's place in society is pretty much the opposite of what we accept today.
To put it mildly, he believed a woman's role was only in the home as wife and mother, essential for the household, but certainly not equal to men.
And here comes that infamous quote about women being infertile males, right? Ouch.
Unfortunately, yes. But here's the interesting IR perspective. Aristotle believed the family with the woman in the subordinate role was the bedrock of the polis. This raises questions. How do different cultures view the role of family and gender? And how can those differing views create either conflict or cooperation between nations?
Now that's interesting. It's like how a society views men and women can actually affect things on the global stage.
Absolutely. Think about how debates about gender equality, women's rights, even family structures play out in international relations. Understanding those cultural differences is key to navigating those issues.
So we've covered the household slavery and the roles of men and women. What's next on our Aristotle tour?
Well, in the next part, we'll tackle another key aspect of Aristotle's political thought, property. We'll explore his ideas about natural and unnatural ways of getting wealth. Trust me, this has fascinating implications for understanding international economic systems and even global debates about resource distribution and trade.
Can't wait. This is already giving me so many new ways to think about international relations, and I'm sure our listeners are finding it just as insightful.
Welcome back. So we've established how Aristotle saw the household like a miniature state, a training ground for citizens, the foundation of a stable political order. But how does this ancient Greek idea actually apply to international relations today? especially for those prepping for the UPSC IR optional.
That's the big question. We've been talking households, families, slavery, all very domestic. How do we connect those ideas to how nations interact globally?
Well, think of it this way. Even today, a state's internal stuff can really impact its foreign policy. How a state treats its own people, its level of economic development, its values, all these shape its behavior internationally.
So it's like looking closer, examining a state's internal structure, its domestic policies, even social norms, to understand its actions on the world stage.
Exactly. Remember, Aristotle's focus on the household as the basis of the polis. Zoom out and think about the modern nation state. We see echoes of that. A state that values justice and fairness at home is more likely to project those values in its foreign policy. Conversely, a state with internal conflict might be more aggressive or unpredictable globally.
Okay, starting to see the connections. It's not just about military strength or economic power. It's about understanding the deeper things that shape a state's worldview, its approach to international relations.
Exactly. And this is where Aristotle's ideas about slavery and women become relevant, even though they're controversial.
Listening. How do those ideas help us understand international relations today?
They force us to acknowledge that the international system isn't built on some objective, universal set of values. States have different histories, cultural norms, and power structures. These differences create friction, misunderstandings, even conflict.
So, for example, a state with a long history of colonialism might approach international relations with a sense of entitlement or superiority, which could cause tension with formerly colonized nations.
Precisely. And a state that marginalizes women might approach diplomacy and conflict resolution very differently than a state with more gender equality.
This is all making sense now. It's about recognizing the underlying assumptions and power dynamics that shape how states interact.
Exactly. Now let's move on to another key thing in Aristotle's thought. His view on property. It has surprisingly relevant implications for understanding international economic systems.
Okay. We know Aristotle was a bit skeptical about trade and getting rich for its own sake. How does that fit into our globalized world today?
Well, Aristotle made a distinction between natural and unnatural ways to acquire wealth. Activities like farming, fishing, things directly tied to meeting basic needs were natural. They had inherent limits. You can only farm or fish so much to sustain yourself. But trade and going after wealth beyond what you need, he saw as corrupting.
So no online shopping sprees for Aristotle. Haha. But seriously, how does this natural versus unnatural wealth apply to international relations now?
It's all about perspective. While we might not agree with Aristotle about trade, his views raise good questions about the limits of economic growth, distribution of wealth, and the downsides of globalization.
You mean things like exploiting workers, environmental damage, the gap between rich and poor countries? Big issues in international relations today.
Absolutely. UPSC, folks. This is where you can connect the dots. Aristotle's ideas about property can help you analyze different economic philosophies and international relations, from free market capitalism to socialist models that prioritize social welfare.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient Greece to modern debates about globalization and economic justice. What else can we learn from Aristotle that can help us understand international relations?
In the last part, we'll tackle one of the most fundamental concepts in international relations, the nation-state, and how it relates to Aristotle's vision of the polis. This is especially relevant for UPSC prep. It'll give you a framework for thinking about things like sovereignty, global governance, and the challenges of cooperation in a world with diverse national interests.
Looking forward to that. This has already given me a new way to think about international relations. I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. Back again for the final part of our Aristotle deep dive. We've gone through his thoughts on the household slavery property and how those ideas can surprisingly relate to the modern world. But there's one last piece.
That's right. It's all been leading to this. How does Aristotle's concept of the polis, the ideal city-state, relate to the international system we have today?
This is where it gets really interesting. We don't live in city-states anymore. We have nation-states, international organizations, global corporations. It's a totally different world.
It is, and it raises big questions for anyone studying international relations. How do we reconcile Aristotle's polis, a self-governing community with shared values and a common good, with our world divided into nation-states, each going after their own interests?
Tough question. Aristotle believed the polis was the highest form of human association where individuals could reach their full potential as citizens. But the polis was a very bounded community right. Shared territory, shared laws, shared identity.
Exactly. That's the tension. Because the modern nation-state system, with its emphasis on sovereignty and national interest, often seems to clash with Aristotle's vision of a common good that goes beyond borders.
But then we also have these attempts at global governance. These international institutions like the UN trying to tackle shared problems, find solutions that benefit everyone.
You're right. And this is where Aristotle's idea of finding the right balance between unity and diversity is so relevant. He knew the polis needed some unity to function, but it couldn't be totally the same. It needed different perspectives, skills, and roles to really thrive.
So are you saying the modern international system is like trying to find that same balance, that sweet spot between national interests and global cooperation?
It's one way to think about it, and it's a constant struggle. Think about the debates we have about climate change, global trade, human rights, all issues that need nations to work together even when their interests are different.
Wow, this really makes me think about the challenges of global governance in a new way. It's like we're trying to make a global polis, a community of nations working together.
And UPSC students understanding these tensions, these competing forces, is crucial. The exam isn't just about knowing facts, it's about thinking critically, analyzing these complex issues from different sides.
Yeah, connecting those ancient ideas to the modern world.
Exactly. As you prep for the UPSC, keep Aristotle in mind. His ideas, even the ones that seem outdated, can give you valuable insights into power, justice, and the pursuit of the common good in a world that's increasingly connected but still divided by borders.
This has been amazing. I feel like I have so many new tools to analyze international relations.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel the same. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives to help you conquer international relations one concept at a time.
Until next time, keep learning and happy studying.